Devin with the Cage Rage podcast, and last night was episode 2 of season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series. 5 fights, and last week I did a recap on the first event of this third season of the Contender Series, which I'm a big fan of. I think it was a perfect thing for them to bring on, moving past the days of the Ultimate Fighter, which has definitely run its course. And I like the idea of these guys getting a shot in a technically separate organization that's kind of like attached to the UFC. They're bringing what they got. They're fighting for a contract. I like that format. I just don't really like that there's not a set system on how you get the contract. You got Dana White just saying he wants killers. It's just really subjective, and it's just basically whatever he decides, whoever impresses him. That's the only standard. Just impress Dana. Make Dana happy. Impress Dana. Go out there, lay it on the line. I mean, last week, Brendan Loughnane, probably the best fighter on the first event, didn't get a contract. There was a lot of controversy behind it. And I guess the justification for that was that he went for a takedown with 10 seconds left, when I thought he was definitely the most seasoned fighter on the show. I thought he fought maybe the best opponent on the show, put together one of the best performances of the show, and wasn't awarded a contract. Well, this week we have 5 fights. All 5 of them go to a decision. I was impressed with... It was just the same thing as last week. All the winners impressed me. I think all of them could potentially fight in the UFC. But I still think that there's some controversy on who's getting these contracts, because once again, for the second week in a row, I don't think the best fighter on the show got a contract. But just starting from the bottom, the very first fight comes out. It was a welterweight bout between Miguel Baeza and Victor Reina. Victor Reina didn't even make weight for this fight, which is something that Dana White cited in the conclusion, in the wrap-up, when he was getting ready to hand out contracts, that impressed him about Miguel Baeza, who actually went on to win this fight, won the decision, looked very impressive, fought a gritty, tough fighter in Victor Reina, who, as I mentioned, didn't make weight. And it was a good back-and-forth bout. I definitely had Miguel winning the fight. And then going on in the second fight of the night, you had Miles Johns and Richie Santiago fighting in a bantamweight bout. And Miles Johns, another undefeated guy, came in 8-0, improves to 9-0, wins this fight, really just outmatched Santiago. Seemed to be, gassing a little bit, but he really came out attacking and landed some really strong shots on Santiago. Really good takedowns, really good wrestling background. He ended up earning himself a contract as well as Baeza. And Dana White seemed very impressed with him. But then in the final 3 fights, you had Kyle Dawkins beat Michael Lombardo. And you had Justin Gonzalez defeat Zach Zane. And you had Tony Johnson defeat Alton Cunningham in the main event of the evening. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Kyle Dawkins. I agreed with Dana's decision not to give him the contract. He's a good fighter, it seemed like. Before coming into this, he was undefeated. He stays undefeated. Had 6 submission wins. He just seems like he still has some growth. I'm not gonna focus too much about him. It was a take it or leave it thing with him. And the main event of the evening, I agreed with Dana's assessment of that fight. Troy Johnson comes out, who ended up getting the decision, comes out, cracks Alton Cunningham early, swells up his eye, and then from that moment on, Alton Cunningham did not want to bang with Troy Johnson at all, and really he couldn't really impose too much with the grappling. So he tried like a Randy Couture style, just Greco-Roman clinch game, heavy against the cage, and trying to get some dirty boxing in, and it didn't work with him. Didn't really impress anybody. Made the fight kind of sluggish, to say the least. And Tony Johnson really couldn't get off much. But he was awarded the decision, and Dana didn't give him a contract. But I do want to talk about Justin Gonzalez, who fought Zach Zane, who maybe wasn't the best opponent on the card for the winners, but Justin Gonzalez came in here. He's had an undefeated amateur record, undefeated pro record, a very good wrestler, and a good 45er, a young guy. And Dana's justification for not giving him a contract is that he was too one-dimensional. Thought he went for too many takedowns, I guess. But since when does being primary in one specific skill set mean you're not qualified to get into the UFC? I mean, the UFC just not only signed but hyped Kron Gracie, who's very one-dimensional. I agree that the sport's evolved past the days of style versus style. I mean, that's common. I mean, that's obvious. But this was not a one-dimensional fighter. This was a guy who is a complete mixed martial artist whose primary skill and primary go-to is his wrestling. I think he was the best fighter on the card from what I've seen. He was very aggressive, seemed to have good power, good fight IQ. I thought he completely dominated this fight. I don't think it's like it's like he didn't go for the finish either. I mean, he was putting a lot of work in. I think he just fought a really stealthy, resilient type of fighter and couldn't get him out of there. But this is the second week in a row that I feel like the best fighter on the card didn't get a contract. So I've got a little bit of angst with that. But nevertheless, Miles Johns and Miguel Baeza walk away with contracts on this card. I definitely do think we're going to see maybe a couple of these guys back on future Contender Series. It was a good event. I really like this show. Stay tuned for further updates from the CRP.